The Joying JY-UQ128 Android 4.4.4 KitKat head unit definitely does not disappoint. I ordered the radio from Amazon after the 1024 by 600 pixel 7-inch touchscreen display caught my eye. I needed a replacement head unit for my F250, and I couldn't pass up the sleek looking and functional nature of what is essentially a car computer. The back of the unit has a lot of flexibility for I/O, as you'd expect from any aftermarket car stereo. There's the standard antenna input for AM/FM, V1 and V2 RCA outputs for additional video screens like in a headrest, a GPS SMA antenna connector for navigation, an RCA subwoofer output, RCA video input, which is separate from the backup camera input, which we will see later on. This input could be used for something like a gaming console or TV tuner. RCA line inputs, now this is in conjunction with that video input, so using it with like an iPod or something is going to be a little tricky. And your standard line level RCA outputs for speakers if you're running amps. The plug for the harness to interface with your vehicle is also located on the back. The unit also has two USB plugs on the back, a 3.5mm input to use with the included microphone, and a non-detachable Wi-Fi antenna. The harness that plugs into the back of the radio has most of the standard ones you'd see on any aftermarket radio. The backup camera RCA is also included in this harness. The wire diagram is on the top of the radio, and I also received a printout that was included with the instructions. The radio comes with what you would expect: screws, GPS antenna, a bezel, the microphone for that 3.5mm input we saw on the back, the radio harness / loom, although you still need the correct loom to adapt it to your specific vehicle, and mine also came with a fancy looking Mahjong tile looking flash drive thing. Side note on the radio loom / harness, Joying has a connector on the end so you can buy an adapter for your radio and your specific vehicle and have kind of a plug-and-play setup. Since I don't particularly want a huge mess of cables behind my head unit or adapters plugged into adapters, I opted just to cut off that plug and solder right to the adapter when I go to install it in my truck, kind of like you would with most aftermarket stereos. Just make sure that when you're cutting off the end, you're cutting off the right end and not the one that plugs into your radio. The unit boots fairly fast, and then you are greeted by a familiar Android interface that's very snappy. I'm not going to go much in depth with the Android OS itself, but I wanted to show you a couple interesting settings I found. The sound option will let you shut off the beeping every time you hit a button. Display provides different options for screen dimming, which is very useful so you don't get blinded at nighttime, especially if you don't have that illumination wire hooked up. Element lets you change the RGB LED color on the touch buttons on the radio. You can pick many different colors and make your own. Storage shows the almost 1 gig on the internal storage, plus an additional 12 gigabytes of NAND flash and the 8 gigabyte SD card that is used for navigation. And any other USB storage devices that you may have plugged into the back will be shown here. Date and time lets you sync the clock with GPS or use internet time. Driving settings has an interesting little checkbox that is off by default, and if you check it, you can watch videos while you're driving. The parking brake sense wire does not need to be hooked up at all. You just click this box and you can watch videos while you're driving. Extra settings has a password, which is 126. These settings allow you to change the boot logo to something other than the Joying one, which is really nice. There are literally tons of options, and I found it funny that there are high caliber car logos in here. I guess you can feel rich by only having to buy a $300 radio. I found my Ford one and hit apply. This menu will also let you change your radio band and what I assume are different audio levels for different system functions and application settings, but I wouldn't mess with these. And in the other settings tab, I also wouldn't mess with these. When you exit, your radio has to reboot, and then we can see the nice new shiny animated Ford logo. I decided to run a benchmark on the system to see how it compared to other Android devices. Geekbench provides some nice details on the system and is a great way to score it and compare it to other devices. After running the benchmark a few times, I was getting a pretty consistent score of 498 for single core performance and 1368 for multi-core. This puts the head unit on par with some Sony tablets or a Nexus 4 or a Galaxy S3. Not too bad. The radio pulls about 0.8 amps on boot and idles around 1 amp. When the key is turned off and the radio shuts down, it goes into an almost hibernate mode, pulling about half an amp for the default 30 seconds. If you were to turn your car back on within this 30-second period, the radio would boot much faster than it would from a cold boot. I guess this feature would be nice if you were in and out of your car a lot. The hibernate time before it completely powers off is an option in the settings menu under extra settings. The shutdown delay when ACC off goes anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 hours. Overall, my initial impressions of the Joying radio are quite high. It's a cool radio for not a lot of money, and it lets you do a lot of really neat things. Make sure to check out my other videos relating to this radio for installation and a more in-depth look at some of the apps and features.